Chicago's winter lay heavy over brick and metal as Sergeant Jack Dalton bled into the alley's fractured ice. Sirens murmured somewhere distant, more rumor than rescue. Steam rose from his breath in thin, failing threads. Above him stood Rex K9, a German shepherd trained for danger but forged by loyalty. The dog's chest heaved, eyes scanning shadowed doorways, calculating risk against time. Jack's pulse weakened, sinking with the metallic drip beneath him. Wind pushed grit along the pavement, whispering a countdown no one could stop. The city towered indifferent, windows black as lids. Rex nudged Jack's shoulder, caught a fading scent of life, then stared toward the street. Between guarding and going stretched a choice that split the world in two. Love did not ask for comfort, it demanded action. Rex lowered his head once, turned, and launched into the dark. Rex K9 tore from the alley with a force that scattered frost and trash. Every stride hammered urgency into the sleeping blocks, a rhythm trained for pursuit, now aimed at salvation. Jack Dalton's scent clung to the cold like browned coffee, growing thinner with distance. The dog's ears sifted the city's layered voices, a bus sighing, a gate rattling, a bottle rolling somewhere unseen. He cut corners hard, nails sparking on manhole rims, breath pluming like engine exhaust. Behind him, the alley shrank to a memory already staining. Ahead, help existed only as a possibility he intended to turn into fact. He knew terrain by smell and echo, charting shortcuts beneath flickering street lamps, threading the skeleton of fire escapes. Instinct argued for protection. Duty insisted on retrieval. Love chose the harder road. Rex lengthened his stride and refused the tug of fear. The city unfolded as a cold maze, grids and alleys folding into each other like rib bones. Rex K9 read the map through sense, warm pockets of human movement stitched into long corridors of emptiness. He hurdled a fallen pallet, slid past a dumpster, darted beneath a low-humming neon sign that painted him electric blue. Air tasted of salt and iron, the same notes ghosting Jack Dalton's blood. Time sliced thin. Every second weighed more than the last. A car idled somewhere to the left. He veered right, chasing the familiar trace of police radio static leaking from partially closed windows. His pad struck wet pavement, splashing icy crescents. Far off, sirens braided in counterpoint, but none leaned toward the alley he had abandoned. Rex absorbed the cold, turned it fuel, and drove harder, a streak of muscle and purpose against Chicago's sleeping stone. At a cross-street pooled in sodium glow, Rex K9 spotted Officer Mark Stevens near a cruiser, posture relaxed, attention disciplined. The dog's momentum snapped the night. Muscle met fabric as jaws clamped a sleeve with urgent certainty. Surprise jolted air, boots scraped pavement, and the pattern of the world changed. Rex didn't plead, he directed, hauling Mark into motion and pivoting toward the lattice of alleys he had mapped by need. Traffic noise smeared into a low roar as their pace synchronized, one four-legged engine pulling a two-legged anchor into sprint. The cruiser's radio crackle bled into the wind, a frequency that promised resources, medics, coordination. Buildings blurred, streetlight shadows strobed across brick, fence, glass. The path became a bead string of landmarks only scent could explain. Behind them, normalcy unraveled. Ahead, the alley waited with its freezing math.
Two silhouettes carved speed to the back streets, one driven by training, one by faith in that training. Rex K9 tracked by air currents and memory, slicing past stacked milk crates, bending around blackwater puddles, vaulting a low chain. Mark Stevens kept pace, lungs burning, the city tilting with adrenaline. The dog's tail cut a metronome for urgency. Blocks clipped beneath their feet like pages turned too fast. A distant nightclub spilled bass through cracked doors, then vanished behind brick. Graffiti flashed and disappeared, names of ghosts layered in paint. They threaded a final passage where heat from a vent briefly softened winter's bite. The alley mouth opened ahead, a square of deeper dark wedged between dumpsters. Rex decelerated only enough to avoid collision, then arrowed in, senses flaring wide. Time, finally, ran out of places to hide. Jack Dalton lay as they had left him, color washed thin, breath shallow and ragged. The alley smelled of nickel and oil, a cruel blend that marked the boundary between chance and consequence. Rex K9 circled, lowering his body to guard the open angles. Mark Stevens dropped to the ground, hands seeking the wound beneath torn fabric, finding the heat of life leaking away. Air condensed in small storms around their faces. Somewhere, glass tinked as it settled, a minutes-old echo of violence. The dog anchored near Jack's ribs, eyes switching between the far end of the alley and the tremor of a pulse under skin. Wheel ruts had frozen into ridges, testimony to hasty flight. Above, a fire escape ladder rattled once in the wind, then fell still. Everything waited. Action concentrated to a point no wider than a coin.
Sound rose from the darkness, thin at first, then carrying weight. Footsteps deflecting off brick, rubber whispering on grit. The alley's geometry sharpened as adrenaline etched detail. Rex K9 stiffened, a living barrier drawn across possibility, ears triangulating approach. Jack Dalton's breathing fluttered, a card house in a draft. Mark Stevens adjusted position, keeping pressure steady, eyes swinging toward the corner where shadow thickened. Cold air snapped through the passage, bringing the scent of sweat and metal. For a heartbeat, the world stood on a hinge, balanced between renewed threat and salvation. Then, voices expanded into the gap. Uniforms filled the mouth of the alley, and the night's tight coil unwound a fraction. Movement became purposeful. Hands, equipment, light. The danger didn't vanish. It stepped back, making room for a different fight, one measured in seconds and blood. The scene transformed from isolation to orchestration. Paramedics knelt beside Jack Dalton, unspooling gauze, assessing breath, and laying down a ladder of steps toward survival. A stretcher hovered like possibility manifest. Rex K9 tracked every motion, reading intention through posture and scent, resisting the pull to climb aboard. Mark Stevens relayed details with clipped focus, anchoring logistics to reality. The alley's walls bounced reflections of red strobes, turning ice into shifting fire. Straps cinched, gloves flashed, the stretcher rose. For a moment, the dog's gaze met Jack's half-lidded eyes, a dim recognition crossing a distance no machine could measure. The air changed when wheels began to roll, something subtle and enormous, as if the city exhaled. The alley did not forgive, it merely released. The fight moved on. Rex gathered himself, held the line, and refused to fracture.
The ambulance split the streets and disappeared into a corridor of lights, siren folding distance into possibility. At the hospital, automatic doors parted like a stage curtain, revealing motion layered upon motion. Carts, monitors, purposeful hands. Dr. Rachel Morgan took command, channeling urgency into sequence. The smell shifted from alley iron to antiseptic and warmed oxygen, a clean battlefield choosing sterility over spectacle. Rex K9 paced the threshold as Jack Dalton was claimed by the operating room's bright geometry. Time reconfigured into an outline drawn by beeps and occasional voices, each a promise or warning. Mark Stevens pressed into a plastic chair that squeaked protest, phone dark in his hand, focus pinned to a single point beyond glass. The doors closed, The world narrowed to hinges and waiting, and to a dog who measured hope by breath. The ICU wore dim light like a deliberate choice, calm carefully curated over the hum of machines. Jack Dalton lay steadied by numbers, their cadence mapped across a screen in soft greens. Wires drew lines the body could not hold by itself. Rex K9 braced his paws on the bed rail, lowering his head onto Jack's forearm, finding the familiar weight of bone beneath skin. Nurses moved around the tableau with learned kindness, reading both patient and guardian, adjusting rhythm without disturbing the long thread between them. Outside, snow stitched quiet over the city's shoulders. Inside, minutes braided into hours, and hours into the kind of waiting that sculpts resolve. The dog did not eat. He did not sleep. He monitored the rise and fall of a chest, the temperature of a room, the distant echo of footsteps that might bring news.
Jack Dalton floated in a dark ocean where time misplaced its edges. The body suspended him, but memory supplied currents. Scenes surfaced, a training field hewn by footwork, Rex K9 younger, eyes enormous with potential. First patrols that turned fear into discipline. The void allowed an ear to sharpen toward faint sound, a thin whine threading through distances the mind normally forbids. With it came scent, a phantom of warm fur and clean leather, conjuring weight, direction, and purpose. Beneath the surface flickered a cautionary glint, a moment on a street where instinct had been ignored. The water pressed from all sides, heavy yet coaxing. Breath measured itself reluctantly, then more certainly. The body negotiated with the dark. Memory argued for return. Somewhere far above, machines sang lullabies of survival, and a dog refused to yield the night. From within the drift, a frame jolted out of sequence. The briefing room wore its usual scent of coffee and dry paper, but faces blurred at the edges, and the city map glowed too bright. Voices layered oddly, mismatched to mouths. A hand tapped the corner of a district square twice, a small tell that belonged to no one Jack Dalton trusted. The mission had seemed routine, yet a residue clung to the recollection like ash. The ambush reassembled itself in flashes: alley, shot, collapse. The distorted briefing insisted on presence that should not have been there, as if a shadow had leaned over the plan. The image sank, rose, and frayed. Suspicion formed without proof, a snowflake on a funness. Jack reached for it, found only water, and held the unease as the current pulled him toward wakefulness.
The climb back toward daylight began as a ripple in breath, a subtle change in the body's arithmetic. Monitors registered the shift like distant thunder. Muscles twitched beneath tape and sheet. Somewhere very near, the familiar pressure of Rex K9's weight steadied a wrist and offered an exit from the dark. The ocean inside thinned. Air delivered itself with less reluctance. The eyelids black lifted, making room for shape and light. The room gathered focus slowly, like a city emerging from fog. Memory did not arrive all at once. It unspooled, threading identity through pain. Command returned to fingers first, then to eyes that found the dog. The smallest nod traveled from thought to muscle. The night's long tether had held. The world met him again with a beep, a breath, and a presence refusing to leave. Wakefulness carried weight beyond the monitor's confirmation. Underneath relief lay an edge sharpened by hindsight. The mission's unease replayed, and the moment before the shot became a landscape of missed cues. Jack Dalton felt the cold calculation of responsibility settle where the bullet's ache had softened. The city looked the same, but carried new meanings across its corners and cracks. Rex K9's steadiness provided the single unbroken line, the one factor that had chosen correctly when uncertainty split the path. Guilt tried to define the narrative, proposing a version where survival felt unearned. The body argued otherwise, with soreness that affirmed effort, struggle, and return. Outside the window, morning drew pale over rooftops. Inside, resolution gathered like breath-warming glass, a commitment to listen to instincts, not as suggestions, but as directives.
Authority arrived framed by years, practical and unpretentious. Captain Frank Doyle measured Jack Dalton with a veteran's eye that weighed grit, scars, and intent. The assessment folded into the day's other numbers, confirming course without theatrics. Work would return, not as punishment or consolation, but as function resumed. The city's demands remained unchanged, and the team's shape relied on bonds proven under pressure. News of recognition traveled beside operational expectations, a civic gesture answering a personal debt. A medal offered public gratitude for private courage, shining briefly against everything dark had tried to take. In the quiet that followed, the room felt larger, as if walls had stepped back to make space for what came next. Rex K9 watched doorways, monitors, and the subtle shift in Jack's breathing, charting readiness with a precision honed by countless nights. Sleep returned in fragments that broke easily against memory's rough edges. Jack Dalton surfaced often, heart sprinting without command, the alley's geometry stamped behind his eyes. Nights stretched long between machine beeps, a terrain navigated by counting breaths until fear loosened its hold. Rex K9 adjusted position each time the panic crested, a practiced calibration of warmth and pressure that signaled safety. Outside, snow settled on stoops and railings, smoothing the city's clutter into clean plains. Inside, resolve rehearsed itself quietly, whispering a pact to recognize the early tremors of danger. The body healed in ways the mind did not yet trust. Dawn, when it arrived, spilled thin light into the room, softening machinery into harmless silhouettes. The day promised incremental gains rather than miracles, small victories scored against a ledger that had once bled red.
The hallway felt longer than memory allowed, a narrow gauntlet lined with doors and muted pictures. Jack Dalton tested gravity cautiously, a trial of joints and stitched muscle. Pain announced boundaries, not absolutes. Rex K9 moved into position without command, shoulder aligned with shin, body a counterweight engineered by instinct and experience. The first step registered like a quiet triumph, the second like informed defiance. The world did not celebrate, it simply permitted progress. Each pace reintroduced confidence as a muscle, something that could be strengthened through repetition and honesty. The floor's waxed sheen reflected a thinner version of the man who had entered on a stretcher. Turning at the corridor's end felt ceremonial, a small loop tied to survival. Breath steadied. The return trip laid another plank across the gap between who he was and who he would be. The parking lot held winter in thin crusts across hoods and roofs. Jack Dalton approached the squad car with a reverence reserved for instruments that had carried him through storms. The door's weight, the seat's contour, the worn texture at 10 and 2, each detail nested into muscle memory. The cabin carried layered scents: leather, stale coffee, gun oil, and Rex K9's warm trace threaded through all of it. Sitting restored a posture the hospital bed could not offer, aligning spine and intention. Wind crept under the door seals, whispering the city's unfinished business. The ignition remained untouched, turning restraint into discipline rather than loss. Rex shifted into his familiar space, settling with the quiet certainty of a ritual reclaimed. Outside, the world continued in rectangles and lanes. Inside, identity clicked back into place, with a soft, undeniable sound.
Word traveled faster than appointments. Faces turned toward the ICU corridor with curiosity and gratitude. Flashing smiles warmed by relief. Phones appeared. Brief applause flickered, then ebbed. Nurse Anna Walker moved with practiced kindness, attending to tasks while offering respect that sought no return.
The air felt lighter, yet Jack Dalton measured every step against inner thresholds rather than public narratives. Recognition drifted around Rex K9 like confetti, colorful but irrelevant. The dog's focus never drifted. The anchor did not look for anchors. Attention fed headlines, but devotion fed recovery. The hospital's clock hands cut their accurate circles above everything performative, reminding that healing unfolds at its own stubborn speed. The corridor quieted again, leaving the two of them in the useful silence where work accumulates grain by grain until it becomes structure. Night returned with its soft camouflage, folding corners into pockets where certainty thinned. A shadow separated from the hallway's geometry near Jack Dalton's door. Movement small, yet wrong, within the rhythm of nurses and orderlies. Rex K9 rose before sound reached human hearing, intercepting the threshold with a warning that stretched the air tight. The handle paused. Footfalls retreated into the building's layered silence. Security responded in ripples, clearing angles, asking for descriptions that evaporated under scrutiny. The incident left no proof, only a residue that tasted like the distorted memory from the briefing. Trust narrowed to essentials. The hospital's light felt less benign, its machines more precious for what they guarded. Sleep arrived late and fragile, but it arrived, because vigilance shared between species built a wall where walls were not designed.
Release carried an odd gravity, both lighter and heavier than expected. Paperwork signed easily. The drive home did not. The city outside the window seemed to stare back, reflective and assessing. Jack Dalton climbed his own steps with deliberate care, hand on rail, body remembering how to belong to a space. The door swung to familiar air, dust, and old sunlight caught in books. Rex K9 swept rooms with methodical precision, nose auditing corners, hearts beating in synchrony through each cleared space. Silence followed like a benediction. Furniture regained meaning. The refrigerator's motor hummed reassurance. Breath relaxed into the pattern houses teach. Each ordinary object held the dignity of survival, not as trophy, but as context restored. Outside, traffic murmured. Inside, two partners recalibrated to a world no longer defined by monitors, yet still measured by watchfulness. The yard became a training ground smoothed by repetition. Cones marked lanes. Thresholds marked reaction points. Jack Dalton ran controlled scenarios where shadows appeared without malice and noises startled without danger. Rex K9 communicated in microsignals Jack had sworn to heed, a tail that locked, ears tipping to angles, muscle fibers hardening along the back. Commands simplified to presence and response. Two dancers refining steps until cues felt like thought. Errors corrected without judgment. Progress tracked without bravado. The body strengthened in subtle ways. Tendons stringing strength across bones that had carried too much. Sun warmed winter's rigid face just enough to promise better days ahead. The work stitched confidence back into muscle memory, sewing over thin places with thread made of discipline and trust. The future stopped being theoretical and began to organize itself.
News from the streets arrived like weather reports, patterns inferred from scattered data. Arrests tightened around the crew that had sprung the ambush, yet loose ends trailed into corridors where names became initials and favors became silence. Jack Dalton revisited timelines, cross-checked assignments, found irregularities that resisted tidy explanation. The distorted briefing memory nagged, a burr under thought. He logged observations without accusations, knowing that structure protects as often as it conceals. Rex K9 sensed tension's shape and stayed closer, inventing a perimeter where none was visible. The city's grid looked unchanged, yet felt rearranged, as though someone had nudged pieces when no one watched. Patience replaced anger, patience woven from the same fibers as vigilance. Answers would come, not from forcing, but from noticing, the way a dog reads wind and decides before anyone understands. City Hall wore applause well, gilded and echoing,
built for the moment when gratitude needs a roof. Cameras framed Rex K9 with care, capturing the sheen of his coat, the steadiness in his posture, the quiet gravity of work well done. Jack Dalton stood near, without seeking center, letting the narrative belong to the one who had earned it with speed, teeth, and refusal to abandon. The medal found its place, a small circle of metal reflecting a larger circle of days and nights. Applause rose, fell, and folded into the city outside. The event mattered because symbolism gathers people into shared relief. It mattered more because the bond it celebrated did not require witnesses. When the lights dimmed and footsteps faded, purpose remained, sturdy and unadorned, ready to return to streets that keep their own counsel.
Recovery's curve invited overreach disguised as determination. Jack Dalton stretched past limits, stacking minutes of exertion where fewer would have sufficed. The body answered with sudden darkness at the edges of vision and a floor that arrived faster than intention. Rex K9 converted concern into action, sound carving space through walls, bringing help where words would have taken longer. The collapse recalibrated pride into prudence, delineating the difference between bravery and wisdom. It did not erase progress, it protected it. The night scare nested into memory beside the alley, a different lesson inscribed by the same hand. The house resumed its ordinary noises, unremarkable and perfect. Breath found steady pace again. In the quiet that followed, commitment renewed itself, trading speed for persistence, spectacle for steadiness, and proving that survival is also an art of restraint. Clearance arrived with signatures and a gate swinging open on familiar streets. The cruiser's engine hummed like a remembered chord. Uniform fabric settled against skin with the weight of purpose. Jack Dalton navigated routes that once felt automatic, now vivid with detail and care. Rex K9 rode alert, scanning faces, windows, alleys, assembling a rolling map from scents and sounds. The city's pulse set tempo, heavy at certain corners, lighter along others. Calls stacked in the system's quiet glow, each a doorway to uncertainty. Crossing back into duty did not erase the alley's ice or the hospital's hush. It wove them into experience, strands of caution threaded through courage. The partnership occupied a sharper edge, not from fear, but from practiced attention. Work resumed where it had paused, different because they were.
A call arrived coded as ordinary, the kind that often ends with paperwork and a fading memory. The location wore afternoon light like armor, a small apartment with a peeling mailbox and a just-shoveled stoop. Jack Dalton parked with textbook position, cataloged exits, and read windows for movement. Rex K9 disembarked into an alert stance that borrowed calm from practice. The hallway smelled of detergent and last night's cooking, layered over old plaster. Floorboards voiced soft history under boots and paws. The door opened to silence arranged as decor. Objects sat where people had left them on better days. The air carried a burn of nerves that did not match the call's description. Rex's ears turned with precision, threading attention down a seam in the room's layout. Ordinary shifted a fraction, enough to register on instincts tuned for thin differences. The shift completed itself in a breath. Rex K9's body locked in a line that pointed cleanly, a compass needle hardened by training. Jack Dalton paused and let the dog's certainty replace habit. Movement rippled from shadow to form as a figure angled for advantage, hand disappearing into fabric with practiced speed. The room's air thickened as future outcomes branched and curled. The dog closed the distance in a burst engineered for prevention, collapsing intent before it hatched into harm. The tableau froze, then unwound into control, the kind that leaves no one bleeding. Silence expanded, then receded, leaving behind the clear space where comprehension arrives. Trust, recalibrated through loss and patience, had held under pressure. The city's verdict settled quietly. Preparation mattered, instincts mattered, partnership mattered most. The day resumed, but it was not the same day.
After forms, reports, and the city's endless hum, the street exhaled into an hour with fewer edges. Streetlights blinked awake one by one, stringing amber along the block like embers on a wire. Jack Dalton knelt beside Rex K9, resting a hand against the warm breath of a partner who had carried more than weight. The metal small circle flashed and dimmed with each passing headlight, a signal that meant less here than in rooms with microphones. Gratitude performed itself louder in public, but it lived strongest in these quieter measurements. A breath unbroken, a street crossed safely, a decision made at the speed of trust. The day placed its signature on the ledger without flourish. Tomorrow waited at the curb, familiar and impartial. The bomb that would meet it stood ready, tested and whole. The horizon thinned darkness into silver, a blade drawing morning across rooftops and wires. The city stretched, elevators waking, coffee machines ticking, buses breathing. Jack Dalton drove streets that now felt both known and renewed, each intersection reminding him that survival had responsibilities. Beside him, Rex K9 watched with the poise of a sentry who accepts neither fanfare nor fatigue as guidance. The night that almost ended everything persisted only as instruction, not as prison. The alley's ice, the hospital's hum, the training yard's patient repetition, and the living room's quiet recovery layered into a single posture pointed forward. There would be more calls, more rooms that lied about their danger, more moments when instincts outran explanation. Partnership had learned how to listen, and listening had learned how to lead. Together, they entered the day that asked for them.